welcome to a long overdue, much needed update. The last couple of months have been busy, insane, stressful. Our last video was our egg retrieval, and we got 14 eggs, 11 of them were mature, and 7 of them had fertilized. And that was the last update I did. The result of our 7 little growing embryos was that 6 of them made it to the freezer. So we were very excited to have 6 frozen. As we were going through the IVF cycle, we had to go a couple extra days of stim meds. So therefore, the doctor said it wasn't going to be an ideal time to do a fresh transfer and that we were going to have to hold off and do a frozen transfer. I was really disappointed at the time, but I mean, if it's not going to work, it's not worth wasting our very, very precious embryos. When we got through the IVF cycle and we were told that it was going to be a month or so before we could get moving with our frozen cycle, we saw with how my cycle was playing out and the break that our fertility doctor really wanted to have, we saw a window. So we booked a trip and we went to the Dominican Republic for a week, because after the few months before that, between deaths in the family and 2 rounds of IVF, we both needed a break. We had a really nice trip. We did a whole lot of nothing. We just sat around and just relaxed, which is something we both really needed. We got back home from that trip the Monday after the 4th of July, and that Tuesday morning, I woke up early and I threw up. I proceeded to throw up 3 more times that day. I had a really high fever, as high as 103.9. At the time, I just kind of told myself it must just be the flu, and I didn't call the doctor, I didn't go to the doctor. I just ignored it, hoping it was going to go away. 6 days later, though, I still had a fever. I still wasn't feeling good. I had very little appetite. So at that point, after 6 days with a fever, Andy and I decided it was time to try and figure out what was wrong with me. So we went to urgent care and they told me I was severely dehydrated. They hooked me up to an IV for 2 bags of fluids and sent me home with an antibiotic. Urgent care said that if I wasn't feeling better in 24 hours, that I needed to go to the ER and be further examined to see what was going on. So the next day I still wasn't feeling better, so we went to the ER. They did another urinalysis, more blood work. At the urgent care the day before, she did a test and said it was not a UTI, which I didn't think it was. But then we got to the ER and they did their test and said that it was a UTI. They were not very helpful. They didn't really want to hear what I had to say and what I thought was going on with my body. They put me on a different antibiotic to treat the UTI, and after 7 miserable hours in the ER, sent me home. They said, go home, drink fluids, take these antibiotics, and you're gonna be feeling better within a day or 2. Well, 2 days later, I still had a fever, I still had no appetite, and I still felt just overall miserable. 3 days after our initial urgent care visit, we drove to a different ER about a half an hour away from home because we weren't happy with the first ER that we had visited, and checked in. And I think it was only about 15 minutes before we were called back and put into a bed. Unlike the other one that was like 5 hours before we were given a bed. So we were already off to a much better start there. After more tests and more blood work, they decided that since the first ER thought it was a UTI and was treating me for that, and nothing had changed, that they were going to admit me to the hospital for overnight observation. I wasn't thrilled. I didn't want to be in the hospital, but if a night in the hospital was going to make me feel better, I was ready for it, because we were over a week into this at this point and I was done feeling like garbage. The next day we did a CT scan and it was found that I had an ovarian abscess. In the end, they decided that they needed to put a drainage tube in my stomach linking to my ovary to drain the infection that apparently was taking over my ovary. My ovary was more than 3 times the size it was supposed to be. Going back to our first IVF cycle a year ago, the day we found out that we were not pregnant, I came down with a fever. And I ended up having that fever for 6 months without the doctors ever figuring out what was wrong with me. So considering that was just after an IVF cycle, as well as this time was just after an IVF cycle, I wonder if they're the same problem. So the CT scan showed I had the abscess in my ovary, and it was ultimately decided that we needed to put the tube in, and that went in the next day on Friday through another CT scan. It was CT guided to put this tube in, so within 24 hours I had 2 CT scans, and I was not happy about that. I have enough problems going on with my reproductive area that I was not happy to be having repeat CT scans, but I understood that at the same time I needed them. At this point, I was not going home from the hospital. My overnight stay was being extended. Luckily, because I had just been to the Dominican Republic, they did not rule out for the first several days that it could be a strange infection from another country. So I did get a private room in the hospital, so that was nice. The drain went in on Friday. 3 days afterwards, we got through the weekend, and Tuesday they ordered an ultrasound to see how much fluid was still in my ovary. Now, as an IVF infertility person, I have had a lot of ultrasounds. This one was by far the worst. The woman was not gentle at all. She poked and prodded around for a good half an hour before she said, well, let me look at the computer and see what they're wanting me to measure. A half an hour in, like, I was already miserable. I was in pain. You're like stabbing at my ovary that has a tube in it and is already irritated and sore and infected. This woman wasn't gentle, and I was getting very angry by the end of it. It was over an hour for an ultrasound, and considering I've had probably 30 or 40 of them, I know that these ultrasounds should take maybe 10 minutes. I got through it. I need to leave that in the past and move on. So, miserable ultrasound on Tuesday. A couple days later, the doctors ordered a 3rd CT scan. My ovary was smaller, and though I was still having drainage from the tube, they did discharge me that day after 9 days in the hospital, but I did have to go home with the drain still in me. I was so relieved to get out of that hospital. There was nothing really bad with the hospital. The food was awful, but that's a hospital, so I'm not even... Luckily, I didn't have an appetite and want to eat absolutely anything for 8 of the 9 days I was there. I had a follow-up on Wednesday. I had to go back to the hospital for a repeat CT scan, my 4th now, in less than 2 weeks, I believe. In 2 weeks, yeah, my 4th CT scan. Again, I was not happy about all of these CT scans, and the CT showed my ovary was smaller than it was when I left the hospital, but it did still show pockets of fluid. The next day I had to go see my OBGYN, and she did an ultrasound and an exam and everything. And at that point, the ultrasound was showing my ovary to be bigger than the day before, which really frustrated me. And she talked about ordering another CT scan, and that's when I drew the line. I was not having another CT scan. We were going to figure this out without another CT scan. The following day, I had to go for a follow-up with the infectious disease doctor, and again decided drain's not coming out. I was really hoping that that was the day the drain was coming out, and I was wrong. Then the following Monday was Andy's birthday. I sucked it up and I put a dress on, and we did go out to dinner for his birthday. So he wanted barbecue, we went out for barbecue. It was a bit awkward going out with the two, but I sucked it up for him for his birthday, and I hope he had a good meal. At this point, I had the drain in for like 2.5 weeks. I really missed the simple things in life. I just wanted to take a shower, and I just didn't want to be sponge bathed anymore. I wanted to eat a good meal and want to eat it. I am a side sleeper, so it killed me to sleep on my back for almost 3 weeks. I didn't sleep well at all during that time. On top of being in the hospital, I had to sleep on my back, so I got like no sleep in the hospital. So finally, a week and a half after I got out of the hospital, we wrapped up my antibiotics that I'd been put on, and then I had to be symptom-free for 48 hours in order for them to be willing to take the tube out. I stopped taking antibiotics on Sunday. On Wednesday, I had to see the infectious disease doctor again. I was clinically well in their eyes, so they took the tube out, and finally, that nightmare was over. It was just a big fingers crossed kind of thing, because I did not want that tube to go back in. Which is why I hadn't really pushed for it to come out sooner, because the last thing I wanted was for it to come out, the infection to spike my fever again, and have to have another CT scan to have it put back in. I did see the OBGYN one more time after the tube came out, just because I had spoken with my fertility doctor, and he said I had to be cleared by infectious disease and I had to be cleared by my OB in order for him to see me again and move forward with a frozen transfer. She had done another ultrasound and said there was still pockets of fluid in there, but in her eyes I was clinically well, so if it was going to turn into surgery or anything further to get this fluid out of my ovary, that was going to be up to my fertility doctor. But in her eyes, I was clinically well and I was cleared to move on from her. I am nervous for the future. I don't know what to expect. I really hope and I pray that we get our babies from these 6 frozen embryos that we have. I don't know if I can go through IVF again. I've had infections after both egg retrievals, and I can't go through it again. I cannot do it. The emotional strain, the financial strain, the physical exhaustion that you get from going through IVF is just, these 6 embryos have got to work. It has to work because my ovary's been through so much. I don't know if it would step up to the plate and produce anything for another round of IVF. So I have a fear that the 6 embryos that we have are what we have, and I just hope we get at least one baby out of it. So moving forward with a frozen transfer is probably going to be a couple of months away. I have to wait for a cycle, and then my fertility doctor wants to do something called a FemView, which is a uterine evaluation to make sure after everything I've been through in the last couple months that my uterus is still up to snuff. And I guess it's also called a uterine scratch. I have seen women post videos that say it's no big deal and it doesn't hurt, and then I've seen women post videos that say it was excruciating. So I'm going to go into it thinking it's not going to hurt, because everybody made me worry about my HSG and I hardly felt a thing. I'm going to hope that this FemView is the same way. Just quick, painless, done. So right now we're just waiting on a cycle for that, and my hope is hopefully by October or November we are getting rolling with our first frozen transfer to put our first little embryo in. So we shall see. But that is the update for right now. Sorry it's such a long video. It's been way too long since I posted an update, so there was a lot to recap. That's life, and we'll see you later. Bye.